Pseudo-archaeology is the interpretation of the past by people who have no training or higher education in archaeology. These individuals usually reject information from professionals in their respective fields. Pseudo-archaeology is becoming more and more popular in recent times, with documentaries on Netflix and an increase in creators on platforms such as YouTube and TikTok. This video aims to educate and discuss this topic, including the history of pseudo-archaeology, hoaxes, and a section on myths. The issues with pseudo-archaeology don't come from the fact that they question the experts. This can be beneficial. The problem arises from the methods and lengths they'll go to prove themselves right. If pseudo-archaeologists used the scientific method, documented everything, and gave reasonable questions for hypotheses, we would have a much easier time discussing. This sadly isn't the case. Pseudo-archaeology and pseudoscience typically stem from multiple things, from racism to the mundane nature of the past. For some, it is more interesting to believe that aliens visited Earth, and for others, they believe that people who weren't Europeans could have possibly done anything without European or extraterrestrial assistance. For example, a belief held from the 17th century up until the present is that Native American ancestors couldn't have built the many earthen monuments throughout the United States. This view has been published throughout the years in articles, tabloids, and even on TV. The most common name for these ancient ancestors in the US is the lost race of mound builders. The theories for who these lost ancestors were ranges from Mormons to a lost European tribe and even Vikings, who did arrive in the US before Columbus, but primarily remained in the northeastern coast. The belief that Native Americans were unable to do organized labor required to construct these earthworks was perpetuated by the president of the Chicago Academy of Sciences, J.W. Foster, in 1873. It's hard to pin down an exact date for when pseudo-archaeology started, though there have been archaeological forgeries at least since the 17th century. We do know that in the US, it started picking up around the 1800s, as Americans were moving westward and seeing the mounds and earthworks created by Native Americans. As the 19th century continued on with more hoaxes, reports in other parts of the world sprung up as well. A very common trend with the older hoaxes were giants and mummies. A mummy had even been reported in North America. However, it was later found that the mummy was made of paper mache without any actual human remains. Some of the other trends in the 1800s came as stone artifacts to prove that there were other people here before Native Americans were even on the continent. These have mostly been debunked, with most having no actual archaeological evidence to back them up. Pseudo-archaeology then sprang back up in the 1970s and gained traction with the book Chariots of the Gods, which would discuss astronauts in Mesoamerica, the idea that we are aliens, and a chapter asking if God is an astronaut. The concept of Mayan astronauts pop up often in modern books as well, with Graham Hancock talking about the same art from Gabon but on a larger scale. In the 1990s, this trend continues as two books were published talking about pseudo-archaeology. One by Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert, which focuses primarily on Egyptian aliens and space travel. The other is by Graham Hancock, Fingerprints of the Gods, which is 500 pages of nonsense. Later in 2009, the show Ancient Aliens premiered on the History Channel, which leads us to the present. Currently, there are plenty of actual pseudoscience and pseudo-archaeology TV shows or documentaries all over different streaming platforms. In 1838, an excavation in West Virginia led to two burial chambers which contained thousands of artifacts. Among these was a sandstone tablet with languages from multiple European countries inscribed on its face. No matter the translation, it was consistent that the tablet was just nonsense and was determined a fake, placed there to influence the beliefs of the community. Another incident involving a planted artifact happened in Newark, Ohio, with a keystone, which had Hebrew writing on its triangular faces. People were quick to point out that the Hebrew written was too modern for it to be some lost tribe of Israel, as they were claiming. The stone was also discovered with no witnesses, leaving larger holes in the story. The Masonic Review during the 1860s jokingly referred to the body which was found with the keystone as Moses, later saying in the article that they should look for the commandment stones next. Lo and behold, 2 months after the article was published, the same man who had found the keystone found carved limestone tablet with the numeration of the commandments. The tablet was better produced, and the Hebrew inscribed was much more ancient in script. The issue, however, was the fact that the same script was being used in 2 different places around the same time, separated by thousands of miles of ocean. An investigation in 2000 led to the confirmation of the people involved in the hoax and their potential motives. As seen with the keystone, in 19th century Michigan, 800 artifacts were found which were meant to tie North America to Western civilizations, such as Egypt, Israel, and Christians. The first of these artifacts were unfired clay, which would typically fall apart if left in prime conditions, such as the wet soil of Michigan. One bowl was even found to have markings from a machine-cut board on the bottom, which further solidified these finds as fakes. Later on, more were found around Michigan by the same group of people. The goal was to have these artifacts shown off at the 1893 World's Columbian Exhibition. Things fell apart when the man in charge of the exhibit, Walter Wyman, decided to pay one of these people who found the artifacts a visit. This visit ended with Wyman finding a workshop full of fake artifacts and even being asked to buy one. Unfortunately, in 1911, the stepdaughter of the mastermind, James Scotford, came forward with a statement admitting that she had witnessed Scotford create fake artifacts and plant them to rediscover later. Many hoaxes run into similar issues. The Davenport tablets, for example, had already been under suspect as they were in mint condition despite being found within a mound. One of these stones was a calendar, which is exciting. However, the tablets were soon debunked in 1885. Hoaxes tended to be stone, which can be dated through fluorescence or stone analysis for weathering. A major myth related to prehistoric North America is a race of mound builders who inhabited the country before Native Americans, as people of this time believed that indigenous population were new on the continent like Europeans. The perpetuation of this myth was motivated by the idea that if these monuments were impressive to the original European colonizers, then the current inhabitants could not have done it as they weren't civilized enough. If natives did construct these earthworks, then the elimination of these alleged savages would be more problematic. One prominent myth is that prehistoric Native Americans didn't even know who built the mounds. However, 2 accounts from European contact demonstrate that they were actively building them and using them into the 19th century. After the De Soto expedition, Garcilaso de la Vega recorded notes on how people were building the mounds and having the chief's home atop them. Another record from the French who lived with the Natchez reported a mound 100 feet in diameter with multiple other smaller mounds with later houses on top. Lewis and Clark also recorded the mounds being used for mortuary purposes. The most perpetuated and harmful myth, pushed and supported by pseudo-archaeology, is that real Indians died off, which is a good book I will be citing in the description. Although many tribes were lost to disease and warfare, there are still over 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States, with 5.5 million tribal citizens. This is much lower than the original 1492 number of around 115 million, though they are not quite extinct. Unfortunately, this myth has led to sites being destroyed, looted, or misrepresented, all of which are disrespectful to the descendants of the many people who lived in these sites throughout our history. One book by L. Mac Perry has the description, "Imagine my surprise when I discovered that my home sits on an ancient Indian mound. Imagine my surprise that 100,000 Indians were living in Florida when the Europeans arrived. And today, they're gone, extinct, no descendants." The description alone is troublesome, as it pushes the idea of natives being extinct. The book itself is not poorly written. The author even cites excavations and investigations of each of his sites. Books that clearly show unprotected archaeological sites are always dangerous, however, as it can lead to looting or vandalism. Perry most likely didn't have this in mind, and the book is fantastic otherwise, minus some outdated information. The myth has its roots in the minds of most people from the 19th to the 21st centuries, noted by the White House Many American artists in the 19th century would exclude Native Americans from their portraits of the nation, including in the White House's collection. The belief was pushed by legislation and political forces throughout the westward expansion. As the expansion and displacement continued, politicians and artists began depicting Native Americans as vanishing, and many believed they were already extinct, as they were moved out of the public view. I recommend asking someone if they believe there are Native Americans left, and seeing their response. One of the first people to challenge these myths was a man named Cyrus Thomas, who, in 1883, was hired to investigate mounds throughout the United States. Thomas went into this project with no biases or theories. He only wanted to document the facts. He went on to write a 700-page report for the Bureau of Ethnology titled Report of the Mound Explorations. This report details his excavations, documents locations, and measurements for over 2,000 mound sites. In this report, Thomas dedicated 136 pages to the discussion of the mound builder race identity. Thomas was extremely thorough and almost single-handedly stopped the mound builder race theory in its tracks. In one section of his book, he discusses the fact that there have been reports already of Native Americans using this land, cultivating acres and acres with food and living in walled cities believed impossible for them. He dedicates this large discussion section to comparing the similarities between the Native Americans who were recorded to the mythological mound builder race. He came to the conclusion that they were one and the same. After being given 700 pages of evidence and 136 pages specifically to analysis and reasoning, the myth has been solved. People may think that pseudo-archaeology does no real damage. However, people tend to use it as an excuse to desecrate sacred sites. Oftentimes, people will consider themselves as archaeologists despite having no training or education and take it upon themselves to excavate sites, even ones under current excavation. This happens frequently and is more common than some think. Other impacts of pseudo-archaeologists are the spread of misinformation, which can lead to people doubting actual information as it releases. This can be seen anywhere and everywhere. As interesting as ancient alien conspiracies are, when compared to actual archaeological results, it can still cause harm to those who would choose not to do their own research into a topic.